Hi, this is Pastor Marleen Griffith-Stull. I'm coming at you with our um, study on Exodus, and we're in chapter 9 and 10. And I won't be back on for a while because I'll be on vacation. So this is going to take you right up through the ninth plague and or sign. The plague only gets called plague until not until the very end of the plagues. But of course, we call them plagues all the time. So that will take you to there, and then we'll start with that final Passover and the final plague in the Passover when I get back sometime. So you can look for that later on. But you're going to feel like it's just a repeat over and over again. Like plague comes, Pharaoh doesn't let the people go. Pharaoh's heart is hardened once again. And it's going to seem very redundant. So I want you to spend some time just looking at what some of the differences are. I want you to look for, when is Goshen mentioned? That's the land where the Hebrew people are. When are they spared, and what plagues have they had to endure? Because they don't endure all of the plagues, unlike the Hebrew people. And it's not just the final plague that they don't endure. There's several others that they don't as well. I also want you to watch what Pharaoh does. Sometimes he doesn't have any response to the plagues, and sometimes he has quite a bit of response, but he never quite follows through with what he says he's going to do or isn't going to do. So chapter 9, we get to the livestock disease. By the way, this is the first time that we actually have something that's going to directly affect the people. I mean, before, they're affected and they're annoyed with the flies and the gnats and stuff. But now this is really going to harm them. It's going to harm the livestock. Well, it's going to kill off the livestock. And here's, again, we have the hyperbole. All of the livestock in Egypt, but none of the livestock in Goshen, which I'll buy into the none of the livestock in Goshen. But obviously not all of the livestock are killed and affected by this disease, because we suddenly have livestock protected later on in some of the other other plagues. So you know there's some hyperbole going on. But like any other time when you've had a very bad disaster or just something that terrible happens in your life, you say things like, it was all gone. It was a complete disaster. It was an utter failure. And it doesn't mean that it literally was an utter failure. It doesn't mean that everything was gone and everything was missing, but it does mean that much of it was, and much of it was destroyed. So that's what you get with the livestock as well. And you notice that Pharaoh doesn't really have a response to this one. And then we go right into the sixth plague, the first time people, humans, are actually affected directly, and it has to do with their health. This is the boils on the skin. And this is, these festering boils that are all over their skin. The magicians cannot stand before Moses because of the boils. It affects all of Pharaoh's people. And then, but once again, Pharaoh's not saying stop. Pharaoh's not responding in any sense yet with that one. But we get to the seventh sign, and we get the thunder and the hail. Hailstorm like you've never seen before is what we hear that it's going to be. And it is. I mean, it kills most of the vegetation. It destroys all the crops. It destroys livestock. But there's a warning that you can protect your livestock. You can protect them if you put them in tomorrow when this hail is going to come. So it's not as if there is no warning. And there are some people in Egypt who are paying attention, who are trusting that God's really going to do this and do get their livestock in. So it's the ones that are still out in the field that are affected by this. And of course, not in Goshen. And then we also get Pharaoh responding once more. And when Pharaoh responds, you'll notice that Pharaoh never prays to God, because Pharaoh doesn't want to admit that God is stronger than him, doesn't even really want to get to know God at all. Maybe doesn't even quite want to admit that God's real, but certainly not that God is above Pharaoh, because Pharaoh still is thinking of himself as God. But he does often ask Moses to pray to God. So you, Moses, pray to your Lord. You take care of this. And that's what happens. And of course, the hail ceases and we move on once again. But Pharaoh's heart is still hardened. And we had a good discussion about this hardening of the heart. And I know I put something on the last video as well. And it's one of those mysteries of God and mysteries of our faith that we're just going to have to wrestle with at some point. Because it does sometimes, some of the passages make it sound like this is all God hardening Pharaoh's heart. And no matter what Pharaoh does, it doesn't matter. But then there's other times, and especially at the very beginning, where it's clear that Pharaoh makes a decision that he is not going to listen to the words of Moses. He is not going to be part of this reality, that the kingdom is not, kingdom of God is not something that he really buys into. And so his heart is hardened sometimes, and sometimes it is God hardening his heart. But my thoughts are that God keeps hardening the heart because Pharaoh's not open at all to God's presence. And in fact, but Pharaoh has an opportunity. If Pharaoh would pray to God himself, I am certain that the plagues would be taken away. I don't think it is something that cannot be changed. I don't think God has decided this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to force Pharaoh not to be open to any changes. I believe Pharaoh has a choice, but I believe pretty strongly in free will. And I think we mess up an awful lot of things that God has made very good for us because of our free will. And it doesn't just affect the person who does it. It affects all of us when somebody does something sinful. So that's what I think's going on. But there are many other interpretations out there, and I hope you ponder it and think about it and pray about that. Chapter 10, we get into the 8th sign, which is the locust. So it sounds like everything's destroyed in the hail, and then the locusts come and they eat up everything that might still be left. So there's still some crops that have survived, and the locusts wipe out the rest of that, which, it's total devastation at this point. There is nothing left for Egypt. And even Pharaoh's starting to see that. He responds that can't you see that Egypt is ruined? So he says, go and worship. But wait a minute, who are you going to take? You can take the men, is where he lands. Don't be taking the women and the children and the livestock. Because I think even Pharaoh knows that if you take the men, the women, children, and livestock, and you take everything, you're not coming back. And that's actually is, of course, what happens in the end, is everybody goes and the Hebrew people never return. But that's the sense, is that it's enough just to take the men. The rest of them don't really need to be worshiping, and you don't need to take those animals. And the livestock, of course, is important because there's sacrifices that are involved in this worship. So then we get to the end of that. It is taken care of now. Again, this strong wind comes and takes away the locust and drives the locust into the Red Sea. And then Pharaoh's heart is hardened again. He will not let them go. And then we get to the 9th one, the darkness. And it's such an eerie darkness that they can't even see right in front of them. But again, the land of Goshen is not affected at all. And that is to the point where Pharaoh says, get away from me. Take care that you do not see my face again, for on the day that you see my face, you shall die. And Moses says, just as you say, I will never see your face again. But they're preparing, of course, for the final, most devastating plague, and that's the one that we remember, the one that leads up to the Passover itself. Now, that is a much more in-depth lesson that I don't really want to go into because we're not going to get to it in our in-person Bible study for some time now. But I do want you, as you read these, I want you to realize that one of the main reason why God doesn't just wipe out Pharaoh and let the people be free is so that Pharaoh and the Egyptians will see who God is. That's the stated purpose. It's actually in the scriptures. I didn't just make that up, and you'll find it if you read closely. But the image is that this is not just about punishing Pharaoh in Egypt. This is about making it clear that who is in charge of creation and who is it that you should be worshiping, that you should be following, that you should be putting your trust and your hope in. And it is not Pharaoh. So the question throughout Exodus is always, are you going to follow Pharaoh or are you going to follow God? And God is the one who brings about life. Obviously, quite a bit of destruction in these things as well. So I say brings about life and creation, but is the one in control of creation, the one that makes it happen, the one that restores it, the one that has created it in the first place and knows it and loves it. And Pharaoh is not, and Pharaoh ultimately does not have control. And that is true not just in Pharaoh's time. It's true in ours as well. So just remember that. Whether you're happy or disgruntled with your government, whether you're happy or disgruntled even with local politics, it is always God who is in control ultimately. It's not us, no matter how much we think we are, no matter how much we think somebody else might have control, might be able to even save us. Sometimes we look to another group of people, whether it's the government or whether it's the church as an institution itself, or whether it's something else to save us. But the reality, it's only our Creator, the one who sends Christ, the one who is God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that can create us in the first place, that did create us in the first place, that redeems us, continues to sanctify us, and ultimately our only way of grace and salvation. I hope this helps, and I look forward to talking to you again. God bless. Bye-bye.